This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neetsahone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today I'm going to take a look at cards from Exodus. Over the last couple of weeks I looked at both Tempest and Stronghold, so the only set left to look at in Tempest block is Exodus. It was released way back on June 15th, 1998. Like the first two sets in Tempest block, it's a set that has had a huge impact on the history of Magic, though I think you'll see that of the three, it may have had the smallest effect. That's not to say it's a bad set or even close to it, it's just that Tempest and Stronghold were insanely powerful. To be eligible for this list, a card had to receive its original printing in Exodus. In all, there were 138 cards that could show up on the list, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, this includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Spike Weaver. One of the first things you might notice here is that the Weaver has a gold set symbol. Exodus was the first set to utilize these color-coded set symbols to indicate rarity, and we still use these colors today, although Mythic Rare would only show up later. Anyway, Tempest block features a whole bunch of Spike creatures, and they all enter with plus and plus 1 counters on them, and then can remove them for effects. In the case of Spike Weaver, you pay 2 generic and 2 green for a 0/0 that enters with 3 plus and plus 1 counters. You can pay 2 generic and remove a counter from it to put a plus and plus 1 counter on something else, and you can also pay 1 generic and remove a counter to prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Between 1998 and 2002, Spike Weaver was featured in standard and extended toolbox decks, where it could be searched up to stall the game out while you tried to assemble a creature-based combo. These decks also featured Spike Feeder, who we saw in the top 10 on Stronghold. The two of them could work quite well together to fend off aggressive decks. It hasn't gained any points since 2002 though, and it isn't out of the question that it could be passed by some other cards in the future. At number 9, it's Shattering Pulse. It has the same total score as Spike Weaver, but more first tier top 8, so I gave it the higher slot on the list. For 1 generic and a red, the Pulse is an instant that can destroy an artifact. It also comes with one of Exodus's mechanics, Buyback. This means you can pay an additional cost when you cast it, and if you do, you return it to your hand when it resolves. In this case, the buyback cost is 3 generic, so if you have the mana, you can just keep returning this and blow up a ton of artifacts. Unsurprisingly, the Pulse was a common sideboard card in both standard and extended, though these days it's really been outshined by better artifact hate, and it hasn't seen play anywhere since 2003. At number 8, it is Merfolkluder, which is, unsurprisingly, a merfolk that loots. This is actually where we get the slang term for draw a card, discard a card effects. For 1 generic and a blue, the looter is a 1/1 that can tap to loot. Looting is a nice effect, especially when you don't have to pay mana to do it. It simultaneously allows you to rip through your library and load up your graveyard. In standard and extended, it was used to help enable cards with madness, like Circular Logic. If you discard a card with madness and cast it, you aren't really looting anymore, you're just drawing a card, and that's amazing. It was also played in Psychotog control decks, where it could help you make your Psychotogs even larger. It was also played some in standard its second time through the format in blue-white Delver decks, but it hasn't gained any points anywhere since 2012. At number 7, it's Mana Bond. For 1 green mana, this enchantment allows you to choose to reveal your hand during your end step and put all lands from it on the battlefield, and then you discard your hand. This was intended to be a fixed version of Fast Bond, an incredibly powerful alpha enchantment that costs 1 green and lets you put a whole bunch of lands into play. While it isn't quite as busted as Fast Bond, Mana Bond's powered down design, which makes you lose your entire hand in order to get the huge mana advantage, still resulted in a pretty powerful card. If you have the lands in your hand, it can give you a completely insane mana boost on turn 1. You just have to find things to cast with that mana after discarding your hand. It did take a long time to start seeing play in competitive Magic, but it eventually found a home in Legacy Lands, a deck that, as the name suggests, is loaded up with a ton of lands. In that deck, sometimes Mana Bond doesn't even have a downside, because the deck makes use of powerful lands. Getting them all into play and using your mana on the abilities of those lands is pretty great. The nastiest thing the deck can do is combine Thespian Stage and Dark Depths. The stage can copy the depths immediately and put a 20/20 token into play, and Mana Bond can make that happen on turn 1. It's going to keep gaining points in Legacy going forward. At number 6, it's Cataclysm. For 2 generic and 2 white, This sorcery has each player choose a single artifact, creature, enchantment, and land, and get rid of everything else. Basically, it's a sweeper that gets rid of everything apart from the best permanent of each of those types. Like Mana Bond, Cataclysm is a card that sees almost all of its play in a single legacy deck, in this case Death and Taxes. It is almost exclusively a sideboard card in that deck, and it works really well alongside Aether Vial, because it allows you to very easily rebuild the board in the wake of Cataclysm. That deck also tends to play a bunch of cards with tax effects like Thalia, so keeping her in play will often mean your opponent has no hope of playing anything with a single land. It's going to keep gaining points in Legacy going forward. At number 5, it's Price of Progress. For 1 generic and a red, this instant does 2 damage to each player, equal to twice the number of non-basic lands that player controls. This can dole out massive amounts of damage against the right opponent, and for only 2 mana, it often ends up being the most efficient burn spell you'll ever cast. It's our 3rd consecutive card that has gained almost all of its points in Legacy, a format where most decks run a ton of non-basic lands, and it can be particularly devastating against the Legacy lands deck I mentioned earlier. However, non-basics are so common in the format that it even sees main deck play in decks like Delver. It's going to keep gaining points in Legacy in the future. At number 4, it's Survival of the Fittest. It's an enchantment that costs 1 generic and a green. You can pay a single green and discard a creature card to search your library for a creature card and put it into your hand. Since the moment it was printed, Survival has seen play in multiple formats. In both block and standard, Survival was combined with fellow Exodus enchantment, Recurring Nightmare, to form what became the game's first true Reanimator and Toolbox deck. While Nightmare doesn't make the list on its own, it's another amazing Exodus card and an important one in Magic's history. These two enchantments combine nicely together because Survival was a discard outlet, which would let you put your Spirit of the Night in the graveyard, at which point you could bring it back with Recurring Nightmare. The deck was also loaded up with lots of singleton utility creatures that you could tutor up, and that's where the toolbox part comes in. For example, this deck could grab Spike Weaver when what it really needed was a fog effect to make the opponent slow down. Survival ultimately got banned out of Extended because it made creature-based decks so good, and it later got banned in Legacy. These days, the only 60-card format it's legal in is Vintage, and it sees sporadic play there. At number 3, it is Oath of Druids. It's pretty crazy that Exodus features what are arguably the 2 best green enchantments of all time, between Survival and Oath of Druids. Fittingly for green, they do both deal with creatures. Normally in this series, I'd like to show the original printing of a card, but Oath of Druid's original wording is confusing enough that I think it's better for us to just look at the more recent printing. Anyway, this enchantment costs 1 generic and a green, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, it lets that player choose another target player that controls more creatures than they do. Then the first player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card, and they put that card directly onto the battlefield. Obviously, this effect is symmetrical, and that can be a problem sometimes, but decks in multiple formats, including Magic's most powerful format, Vintage, have found ways to break this symmetry. And if you can do that, it allows you to cheat insane creatures into play in the extreme early game. This is generally accomplished by giving the opponent creatures with something like Forbidden Orchard, and once you do that, you're able to cheat your Atraxa or Gristlebrand into play anytime Oath triggers. Oath is so powerful that it's banned in Legacy, and that means Vintage is the only format it's legal in right now, but Oath decks have been a factor in Vintage for the last 2 decades, and that's not changing anytime soon. At number 2, it is Sphere of Resistance. For 2 generic mana, this artifact makes all spells cost an additional 1 generic mana. It only saw a little bit of play in standard sideboards, but has been played a ton in the Eternal formats. In Legacy, it's most frequently in the sideboard of the aforementioned Lands deck, which doesn't run a whole lot of spells and thus isn't quite as negatively affected by it as most decks are. It sees the most play by far in Vintage. In its earlier days, it was played in Stacks, a deck loaded up with various forms of resource denial like Smokestack, and the Sphere is especially punishing if you're making your opponent lose lands. These days, it's often played in artifact decks that are capable of producing tons of mana with Mishra's Workshop and other cards. That deck's ability to produce so much mana really helps break the symmetry on the Sphere. The Sphere is going to keep gaining points in the future, but that's true of the card in front of it too, so it probably won't ever have the opportunity to move above the number 2 slot on this list. And at number 1, it's City of Traders. This is a land that can tap to produce 2 colorless mana. Obviously, that's awesome, but there is a downside. If you play a land, you have to sacrifice the city. The huge mana boost is obviously worth the downside though, as evidenced by the more than 300 points it's amassed across multiple formats over the years. Legacy has been its most successful format by far. It sees play in a wide variety of decks in the format, especially in decks that look to take advantage of one huge turn to win the game, like combo decks in Reanimator. This gets you to that turn a full turn earlier, and the downside doesn't matter a whole lot since the turn it gives you will often determine the outcome of the game. City of Traders is going to keep on seeing a ton of play in Legacy, and it's going to remain the number one card in this list for the foreseeable future. So, those are the top 10 cards from Exodus. If you want to own any of these cards, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more MTG top 10s that look at sets, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.